All right, Jonathan, what's happening in the news?
Well, we've got sort of three major pieces of news we want to cover today, and one of them is one of the saddest things we've ever had to talk about on this podcast. And that is that David Lynch, who I would have until a couple weeks ago called the country's greatest living director, America's greatest living director, passed away at the age of 78. We had known for 2 years now that he had emphysema caused by heavy smoking throughout his lifetime, and that weakened his lungs and meant that he was mostly homebound and was not going out and didn't feel he could direct anymore. The fires in Los Angeles, which we also have not talked about on here, obviously if you are in LA and have been affected by it at all, our heart goes out to you. That was very bad for Lynch's lungs and body, and he had to evacuate to his daughter's home, where he did pass away, sadly, at the age of 78. There has been an outpouring of grief and remembrances from the film community in a way I've rarely, if ever, seen for a filmmaker, especially an American filmmaker in my lifetime who has passed away. And, you know, it's caused a lot of reflection from me, and I'm sure from you, Sean, because David Lynch isn't just a director we love, but he's important to our podcast history, because we've talked a lot about particularly Twin Peaks, but within there, obviously, a lot of his other work as well. And you and I have both said very forthrightly, long before he died, that our episodes on Twin Peaks The Return, the third season of Twin Peaks that aired on Showtime in 2017, are some of our favorite podcasts we ever did. And yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about Lynch. I've been working on a piece for my site that I keep kind of putting off because I find it difficult. This is a weird case where losing a filmmaker feels like losing a friend, and I know that is weird and parasocial to say, but that's who David Lynch was, and if you're going to say something weird about someone, you might as well say it about David Lynch.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where, you know, he was not only so talented, but he was so unique, right? And so, like, all the stuff he worked on, it just felt like it was so personal, and you do feel like you get a real, like, insight to him by watching that stuff. And then obviously when you see interviews with him and things like that, it sort of more and more reinforces this kind of understanding of this very bizarre, but very beautiful and compassionate person that he was, you know. And yeah, I mean, obviously for both of us, his movies are some of the best movies ever. You know, particularly I like Mulholland Drive, and then Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me. I think Fire Walk with Me is one of the best horror movies ever made. I think Mulholland Drive is just one of the best movies. And then Twin Peaks The Return. Old Twin Peaks is incredible. Obviously, it's got its like rocky period with season 2, although even that's got a lot of really good stuff in it when David Lynch was involved. But then Twin Peaks The Return is like arguably the best TV show ever made. I know we just said that it's you know, a shame to try to saddle something with that kind of appellation, but like, it is one of those things in that conversation, certainly of like the 21st century, one of the most effective and kind of like defining pieces of art of our kind of like generation and our time. And it continues to be that as we continue to go down the incredibly unfortunate path that the world is going down. And so, yeah, like it is, I think, a very keenly felt loss because of how beautiful his movies are, how powerful his movies are, how kind of therapeutic his movies are in terms of a lot of the themes that they've worked through, and how he gets at both like the pleasant and deeply unpleasant parts of what it is to be like American and Americana. Like that's one of the things when you describe him as being like one of the great American directors, it's not just because he was a great director who happened to be American. It is that his movies are about, and his TV shows are about America, and a particular vision and kind of America that taps into something I think very essential. And it's why his works inspire so much else, you know, like we have a whole word Lynchian for what he did as an artist. And I think part of it is just because of how it speaks to something on a very deep level to the country of America and what it has been in the late 20th century and through the 21st century.
100%. And when I, you know, think about who my favorite directors, filmmakers are, it is the people who are the most singular to me and like are the most irreplaceable. Lynchian is a term, but I think it is often a term used in this tries to be Lynchian and doesn't do it. Like, that's how I would often use it. Because I think his voice is so utterly singular. There is just nothing else like his movies. Nothing else even really remotely like his movies. Even as his movies often reference and rework cinematic history. I mentioned Vertigo earlier. I think Mulholland Drive is the better version of Vertigo. But it doesn't... Vertigo is not Lynchian. Like, they're very, very different. And when I think of my other favorite directors, like a Miyazaki Hayao or an Ozu Yasujiro, it's people who are like unmistakable and irreplaceable, and when they're gone, and there's nothing that can like fill that void, which is sad, but it also means that what they leave behind is like towering and singular. And while I agree, Sean, it's we just talked about not saddling something with this is the greatest blah blah blah, so I'll put it this way: in my critical opinion, as whatever I am, scholar, critic, whatever faith you put in me, I think Twin Peaks: The Return is the greatest piece of live-action filmmaking that has come out in my lifetime. Like, film, TV, there's a whole debate, what is it? It's TV, but it is also film, because they're kind of the same. And I think like that's the top, that is like of things that have come out in my lifetime, the thing I would put at the peak, at least again for live-action filmmaking, and certainly for American media. It is just staggering, and I'm looking forward to rewatching it soon. There's a new Twin Peaks. This is kind of funny. I had just sold my old Twin Peaks Blu-rays right before he died, because there's a new box set coming out this week that we're releasing this that has everything in one place, plus some bonus features. It's a repackaging of a set I missed out on when it was new, and I wanted that, and it's cheap. But it meant that when he died, I didn't have my Twin Peaks Blu-rays in the house. I was so sad. But I'm excited for that to come and to start rewatching that, because I do think Twin Peaks as a whole, including The Return, Fire Walk with Me, and The Show, is his magnum opus. That is the Lynch text. I would say right under that is Mulholland Drive for me, and then Blue Velvet. But you could also make, very good arguments for Eraserhead and Inland Empire and Lost Highway, which is fucking incredible. All of it, It's even like the one movie of his I don't really like, Wild at Heart, I respect the hell out of, because there's no other movie like Wild at Heart. Who else would interpolate Wizard of Oz in the way David Lynch interpolates Wizard of Oz? It's incredible. And then just as a personality and a thinker and a speaker, he was so amazing. Like, there was a lot of focus on how he never wanted to sit down and tell you what his movies were about, and that's true, and I think that was wise of him. And I think it's a quality he shares with a lot of great filmmakers. But he would talk to you about anything else. He was very open and generous with his thoughts on art and what it is to be creative and to be human and to be alive, and his thoughts on things like transcendental meditation. And you could see how earnest he was in all of these things. One of the descriptions a professor of mine uses that I think has been used by other people too is that David Lynch's persona was basically Jimmy Stewart from Mars, this like all-American Midwestern guy who also seemed like he was an alien in a skin suit in some weird way. And that made him more immediate and lovable, not distant from us. And, what a guy. I have very fond memories of the last time I taught film theory. Lynch was still doing his daily weather reports, and I would often start class by just putting on one of his daily weather reports, where he would tell you to have a great day, and he'd tell you there was sunshine all along the way, and he'd encourage you on Fridays to work on your weekend projects. And man, I miss him. It sucks.
Yeah, it's really, really sad that he's gone, but like, what an incredible body of work.
Oh, yeah.
That he has left behind.
Well, the other thing to say about Twin Peaks: The Return, as we have noted over the years, is it wound up being the final work for so many people involved in it. It was Angelo Badalamenti's, the composer's, final work. Many actors, including Robert Forster and the lady who played the log lady, and Miguel Ferrer, and Harry Dean Stanton. It was that and his movie Lucky were his final works, which David Lynch was also in. And of course now it's come full circle because it wound up being the final major work from Lynch himself, which means, among other things, it is like the definitive 18-hour filmic portrait of death, and what death and mortality is, because I think that's so much of what Twin Peaks: The Return is about, in addition to its themes on time and Americana and everything else. So Yeah, maybe we will have to do a bigger topic on different Lynch things later on in Purely Academic. I didn't want to rush it and like try to rework this month's podcast because I think it's still raw. I don't know if it would be the best time to do that, but I at least wanted to talk a little bit today.
No, absolutely. And obviously, David Lynch stuff will keep coming up, whether we do topics on it or not.
Yes.
It is one of those things, a la Citizen Kane, that like, it is just part of the way that we process media is fundamentally through, like, his works are part of that whole kind of filter that we have. So,
Sean, when I got the notification on my phone that he had died, I was working on a PowerPoint about identification theories in cinema, which involves a lot of Freudian stuff. And that presentation is full of images from Blue Velvet because it is the best movie on those themes and voyeurism and all those ideas and how to describe them. And that's not an outlier. That wasn't like just a crazy coincidence. A lot of my slides have David Lynch on them. And my students know who he is. And that night I had a screening and I just opened it by talking a little bit about Lynch and showing one of his old weather reports and just all of that. And showing the clip from Twin Peaks where Cooper, this was being shared widely for good reason, where Cooper explains how you should give yourself a little treat every day. And his treat is a cup of damn fine coffee. And man, it was so cathartic to do that with my students because they all got it too. It was wonderful.
yeah.
So, all right. You want to talk about something much less important?
Yes, yeah. Let's get into the trivialities of what's going on in video games right now, Jonathan.
Yes, well, what's going on in video games? Nintendo has formally revealed the Nintendo Switch 2. That is what it is called.
They're making another Nintendo Switch? I had no idea.
Yes, they're making another Nintendo Switch. Basically, this is the same playbook they used with the Switch 1, where the Switch 1 was unveiled through a video in October of 2016. Then in January of 17, they did a big Nintendo Direct showing the hardware and all the details and what games would be and all of that, and then it launched in March. They did a same thing here, where in January, for the Switch 2, they did this little video just showing off this is what it is, that it's what it's called, this is what it looks like, with a brief clip of some kind of Mario Kart running on it, not exactly sure what that is. And then they said there will be a Nintendo Direct completely breaking it down in April, and we presume from reports that it's coming out in June or July. So basically, a lot of people were acting like this was new. This is how Nintendo did the Switch 1. This is not a new playbook for them. The one thing that is different is that the Switch 2 was leaked much more thoroughly than the Switch 1. And so what we saw in the reveal was what had been widely reported. Although I will remind some people that not everyone interested in the Switch 2 is a criminally online person who has seen all the leaks. So it was still new. I heard a lot of people like in my life who are more casual gamers who were like jazzed and had no idea. Because again, most people are not weirdos sifting through reports online. And the Nintendo Switch 2 is what it says on the tin. It is an upgraded Nintendo Switch. I mean, not to say like it's just an upgraded version of that. It is an all-new console. It is bigger. The screen-to-bezel ratio is different, all of that stuff. The new Joy-Con are magnetically attached instead of on rails, which was what they wanted to do for the Switch 1. We actually know that from old patents that were reported at the time, but now they've actually figured it out. The right Joy-Con has a new button. The whole console this time is black with colors on the inside of the Joy-Con, not the outside. I presume there will be different colorways later on down the road. And we presume it will be more powerful and all that, but for now, the story really is just that Nintendo is not doing the Switch U. They are not doing the Switch 3D. They're not zigging and zagging where we expect them to go one way. They're keeping it safe, which is also, I think, the smart thing, and just saying, hey, the Switch is arguably the greatest success in the history of video games. Let's do the Switch 2. We're not fucking around. And I think it says an awful lot that Nintendo, a company known for habitually fucking around, is saying we are not fucking around this time.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that, this is a different Nintendo in terms of the people behind the scenes, right? Because the Switch, well, Iwata had passed away by the time the Switch came out. He was the Nintendo guy for most of its development behind the scenes.
Yes.
And so, like, Iwata's regime, I think, is the one that is really defined by Nintendo making really big swings in terms of hardware design that inform fundamental gameplay elements. Whether you're talking about the Nintendo DS, whether you're talking about the Wii or the Wii U or the 3DS, which is a little bit lighter on that, with the 3D is a bit more optional, but it is still a, like, fundamental hardware feature that was unprecedented, more or less unprecedented. At least that kind
Yeah.
of 3D was unprecedented on a home console, and was meant to be a thing that like fully distinguishes this console on a very hardware based level from any other Nintendo console. And that strategy had big successes with the Wii and the DS. It had, the 3DS was still a success, not on a DS level, but and it had a rocky path early on, but it ended up getting there. Then obviously has a very distinctive failure, which is the Wii U. And so the Switch then obviously, will probably end up being the best selling console. It either will be or will be like almost like it'll be right there. Like that is an obvious reason to say, hey, let's just not rock the boat too much, and just continue on that path. I just think that that is clearly the right choice. Like I can understand some people who are really into the idea of like let's do something fucking crazy all the time. Like I can understand the perspective that you want that, but I think it would be very ridiculous of Nintendo to rock the boat too much at this juncture. And it's like the Switch 2 I think is lined up in a really good place to just be a more powerful version of what they had done the last time around.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't really understand the perspective of the people who are disappointed by this. Like, the secret sauce of Nintendo has never been the gimmicks, it's been the game design. Now, the gimmicks have helped with that sometimes. The DS, I think, being probably the best one before the Switch in terms of opening up avenues of game design that were previously closed. And so there are games like Etrian Odyssey that exist that, like, literally just can't exist on other platforms. There's the port to the Switch that people that I've seen generally agree does not play very well because that was designed to have two screens and a pen. And there are lots of good examples of that on the DS. It was a really great machine for RPGs. But, like, in general, the hardware is a thing that facilitates game design. The Game Boy was a huge swing at the time, but it was also made in such a way that, yes, its graphical options were relatively limited, but within that limited zone, a lot of good game design could be done and could be created, and it was cheap and it could get into people's hands. And I think the Switch is like that in the 2020s. It's something that has found the right balance of all the different ways people play games and all the different ways Nintendo develops games internally and with a lot of their partners, and what kind of puts their best foot forward. And I do think their best gimmicks have been defined by that, if you're thinking in terms of gimmicks, like the Game Boy line, like the DS line, and now like the Switch, is where the quote-unquote hardware gimmick lets you really double down on game design. And the great thing about the Switch, and the Switch was, we can say now with historical hindsight, a huge disruptor to this industry that has spawned a ton of innovators and well, I didn't really mean innovators, I meant imitators, sorry, and whatnot, and kind of upended, now it's weirdly upended the PC market in all these ways, right, because of the console hybrid thing and proving kind of the desire for that and the way you can put game design all in one funnel. And for Nintendo specifically, it's removed what had long kind of bedeviled them, which was a split between handheld and console design, where they were never quite able to service both perfectly at the same time, which is part of why, like, when the triage came with the 3DS and Wii U, the 3DS had the library and the Wii U didn't, and the Switch has not suffered in that way. So, yeah, I think, like, this makes total sense. Absolutely, this is the time. Eventually, the Switch line will have been around long enough that it will need to be disrupted. Remember, the DS didn't happen until the Game Boy had been a thing for 15 years in different incarnations. Game Boy, Color, Advance, all of which had complete backwards compatibility, and then they reset with the Nintendo DS. And then that went on for a pretty long time before it too was disrupted, over 10 years. So we're not at the point where I think they need to disrupt what the Switch is. The Switch is good. The Switch is awesome. I think it's the best console of my lifetime. I've loved every moment with it. It's got so much good stuff. And I think just doing an upgraded version of that sounds good. I like the look of the hardware. I like that they're focusing in on fixing the Joy-Cons. What we saw of the Joy-Cons does seem to indicate that the reports that they'll be using Hall effect joysticks will be true, because that's what a lot of the reports that said they would look like this said. That would be a big fix, given the biggest issue with the Joy-Cons is the stick drift. So I'm excited. I want to see more. There's not a lot to say about it yet, other than Nintendo ain't fucking around. And finally someone has learned from PlayStation, you can just append a number to the name of your console. No, it won't hurt you. It'll probably help you. It makes life easier. Just do a number.
Yeah, there is a part of me that does really wish they called it the Nintendo Super Switch and just went all the way back to the Super Nintendo thing. But, yes, it is infinitely preferable to the Xbox. Like, we're just going to invent a new way to name our consoles every time we make one. And it's just, that's a terrible thing. And the Nintendo Switch 2, yes, just call it that. That's totally fine. Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting about this video, you are in a weird position if you're an enthusiast who has been reading all the leaks, is that you know way more about this device if you have been reading the leaks than you get from the video.
Yes.
Because the video itself, it does it effectively confirms everything that the reputable leaks indicate, or it mostly confirms that, there's the strong implication based on what they show in the video of the thing that the Joy-Cons can be used as like a computer mouse effectively, which I'm very curious what that means in practice, just in terms of what format do they sort of anticipate players using that? Because the only thing that makes sense is a tabletop, you set it up on the table, and you just play on quote unquote portably, but have it on a table with the mouse pointer there. I can't imagine the average person is gonna play on their couch with that on their leg or something. That just seems not practical. So I'm curious what their pitch is, because that seems to be the only real thing we know from the leaks that indicates that there's some sort of hardware thing in the Switch 2 that the Nintendo Switch 1 did not have, outside of potentially whatever this additional button does, but I'm not expecting that additional button to do something crazy. It's probably some sort of social feature or something like that, like a share button-esque kind of thing. But yeah, so I'm curious, Jonathan, what are your thoughts on the computer mouse Joy-Con thingy that we seem to know is happening?
I have no fucking idea yet. We'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, there are people, I think it is a niche, but there are people with gaming setups where they have some kind of table for their couch that they swing over, that they do mouse and keyboard on console. Like Xbox, there are accessories made for that, because Xbox has greater mouse and keyboard support than the PlayStation does. More even now than it was, but historically that's been the case. So that's not unthinkable that you could do that. We'll see if what games use it. I would imagine what it will be is there will be some kind of party game at launch, like Wii Sports or 1-2 Switch or something like that will use this. And then a couple of third-party games will find cool uses for it, but mostly it'll be like the IR sensor on the bottom of the Joy-Con right now that almost nobody uses.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, because Nintendo does always pack hardware features, and Sony kind of does this too. Sony puts it in their controllers that are niche features that a tiny handful of games, like the touchpad on your DualShock 4 or DualSense, will use it well. But the vast majority of things, even first-party things, will just kind of not use them. And I'm just expecting the Joy-Con mouse thing to be like that. But it is a curious feature, and I'm just mostly curious to see how it's going to be pitched. I just have no idea how Nintendo visualizes that being used, because obviously we can come up with use cases, but every use case I can imagine is so narrow. I just want to know what Nintendo's going to do with it. The other,
can I call out two other hardware things that tell me that actual hardware enthusiasts are working on this device? One, it's got a USB-C port at the top and a USB-C port at the bottom, so you can charge it either way. There have been rumors of some kind of second screen accessory that will go into the USB-C port at the top. That wasn't in the reveal, but that does mean it is possible, so we'll see if that happens. But the other thing for me is, still got a headphone jack, still got a 3.5mm auxiliary headphone jack, and that shouldn't have to be something we expect in the year of our Lord 2025, but Apple and Samsung and Google have all seen to it that phones no longer have that, so you've always got to be wary. And I'm very, very glad to see that still there, because it is one of the nicest things about the Switch. I just keep a pair of wired headphones in my Switch case, and they're always there, and they always work, and it's never a problem, and it's great. And I'm very glad that is not being fucked with.
Yes, that is definitely good. It is the bane of all modern phones that they have gotten rid of that, and it is infuriating. The only other major thing based on just the video, because I don't think we want to get into the weeds of talking about what do we know about it from leak stuff, because that will all eventually be official and it's better to talk about it in that capacity. But from the video, we did of course see glimpses of this new Mario Kart game. Presumably it's Mario Kart 9 or Mario Kart Triple Dash, whatever the fuck they want to call it, right? But it is a sequel to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. You only see very brief snippets of it. And I did think it was like, it's a curious game to show in that, like, obviously on the one hand, you want to show a Mario Kart because Mario Kart is one of the best selling video game franchises ever. But on the other hand, I don't think that, like, what they showed made it clear what that it's like notably better hardware. We know that it is much better hardware than the Switch 1, but it doesn't look like it based on the clips of the Mario Kart stuff. Like, you can see that it's kind of a bigger course. You can see that there are more racers, so there's like 24 or whatever instead of 12. And that's, that's notable. But I thought it was like a game that didn't really sort of jump out at me as showing off this is the capability, the graphical upgrade that you're getting with the Switch 2, because the graphical upgrade is just what the console is, right? Like, it's not like lateral movement like the Switch was from the Wii U, where the Switch was like broadly comparable to the Wii U in terms of a power level. It was just like, what is the hardware of the device? And the like use case for the device was very different and much more appealing for the Switch. But this time around, if all you're pitching the console on is a new Switch that can play more technically advanced games than your old Switch could play, like, I felt like that was the only missed opportunity that they had in pitching the console, was that they just didn't really show off something that I think made it clear what are those technical advantages of your Switch 2 over your Switch 1.
I think that's true, but also this isn't the full review. Like, this is...
Sure.
Like, their pitch will be the Nintendo Direct, like, in terms of them directly, and like when they start the marketing campaign. They haven't started the marketing campaign. Yeah. They've done one YouTube video, right? So we'll see. I do just want to, like, underline, Mario Kart 8... in its 2 versions, has sold 73 million copies. It is the 5th best-selling video game of all time, right under PUBG. It is the 2nd best-selling Nintendo game of all time, below Wii Sports, and Wii Sports kind of doesn't count, because that was a pack-in game. Like, the reason that they put Mario Kart in there is because it's Mario Kart, and it will sell, like, ungodly numbers, and it makes sense why they're doing that. And I think, at least at a glance, I think for the actual, like, unveiling where they talk about it and they show multiple games, I agree they're going to have to show some, like, technical prowess to get the enthusiasts on board. I think for the at-a-glance marketing, people don't buy Nintendo consoles because of the graphics. And that's been true for a very long time. So I think it depends on who you're kind of selling it to. And again, just from what I heard from, like, people in my life who are more casual gamers whose system is the Switch and that's what they play, right, they were excited to see this and see that there's a new Mario Kart, and that kind of, like, if there's 2 things you had to check off, it is obviously new hardware and there's a new Mario Kart, and that's kind of it. And in 90 seconds it did that.
Sure. I guess for me, and obviously I'm speaking as someone who's not, like, in the Nintendo world, and so, like, I'm a potential customer for the Switch 2, but I'm someone that has to be won over because I'm not really hugely interested in Nintendo first-party games, and I don't particularly like Mario Kart. I like Mario Kart fine, but I don't like Mario Kart that much. That, like, for me watching the video, there's no, for me, like, clear pitch on what this console is compared to the Switch 1 reveal, where that Switch 1 reveal, which didn't show much, like, a lot of game stuff. It showed a little bit of game stuff, but that one really clearly pitched what the console was, of here is this device that can be used in all these different ways, and it can fit in your life in all these different ways, whether you're, like, a hot New Yorker who has rooftop parties or whatever, right? And they had, like, all that kind of stuff and all these scenarios with the tabletop and the handheld, and it connects to your TV. And it is something where I'm curious to see how they try to pitch a device where, as you say, Nintendo doesn't sell consoles based on graphics, but graphics is the thing that this device does. So obviously there's an inherent value of, like, eventually they will only be making Nintendo Switch 2 games. We don't know if there will be a cross-gen period like what we've had with the Xbox or the PS5. Obviously there will be some kind of cross-gen. It has backwards compatibility. I have to assume Metroid Prime 4 is going to be some sort of cross-gen game that will have a Switch 2 upgraded version or something like that.
They've got a lot lined up for this year that we know about that is probably cross-gen, but they just haven't said it yet. Because we know they've been keeping their powder dry, because we know part of why it's taken so long for this to come out and why there's so many leaks is that they've been trying to, like, hoard stock, have games ready, not have a quiet launch period. So my guess is they're going to have a lot of stuff to show off in terms of graphics and cross-gen stuff when we get to that point.
I'm just curious, like, how do they try to pitch to people who already have a Nintendo Switch to get a Nintendo Switch 2 in terms of which games do they make exclusive? And are they able to make the case for like the graphical upgrade being a thing that wants the much more casual player to move up to this new console? Because also, obviously, there's a huge question mark in terms of the cost. That question mark has gotten a lot bigger in the past couple of days, given the tariff situation. So there's just like a lot of stuff that I'm very curious to see at the full actual unveiling, how they deal with some of those problems, because the Nintendo Switch 2 has a lot of advantages coming to market, being the successor to an incredibly successful console. Again, potentially the most successful console ever, but it also has some other difficulties because it doesn't have like that sort of innovative pitch that the original one had. So you need to find some way to get the 150 million something people that bought a Switch 1 moving over to this new device, and then potentially wanting people who did not have the Nintendo Switch 1 to get a Nintendo Switch 2. And I'm just curious how they make that pitch.
Yeah. But I'll say this, though. I think this is a better pitch than any of their other sequels to giantly successful consoles before.
Oh,
right?
yes.
Like,
yeah.
Because that's the thing. Like, with the DS to the 3DS, it was the 3D and a graphical upgrade. But, like, the 3D, we just know didn't sell people because they eventually ripped it out and sold it as the 2DS. The Wii to the Wii U, there was a graphical upgrade, but there was also the gamepad thing, and we know that didn't sell people because it sold 13 million copies. And, like, Nintendo has sold, like, 70 different Switch games that have sold more than the entire body of the Wii U. So, like, or even if you think of, like, Super NES to N64, which N64 did okay, but it got swamped by the PlayStation that generation. GameCube got swamped. Like, I do think there's a cleanness to this that generally I think it's easy to underestimate how much people do understand. If you have something that is the 1 and then you have something that is the 2 is better, and you don't need to sell me a ton of bells and whistles to get that. There's a reason why iPhone has never done weird names. They go iPhone 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And why, like, a lot of other phone companies have fallen in line with that. Samsung used to have really weird phone names, and now it is S22, S23, S24. I think there's something in the human psyche that, like, doesn't need to be oversold on some of that.
That is a good point, yeah.
Yeah. So we shall see. But as Nintendo continues to conquer its corner of the console market, Xbox continues to retreat from its corner, because we got news this last week. And, like, on one level, it's a quiet piece of news, but I also think it is, like, seismic in its own way, which is that Forza Horizon 5, the most recent of the Forza Horizon games, which are the open world adventure Forza games, this is the one that was set in Mexico. That is coming to the PS5 this spring, alongside the previously announced Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which was on Xbox in December and will be coming to the PS5 this spring. This is by far the biggest Xbox franchise that has gone multi-platform. Forza is, honestly, in the Xbox One and Series era, maybe their most consistent franchise in terms of acclaim and sales.
I was going to say, Jonathan, you could have stopped that sentence at, like, this is their most successful or most acclaimed franchise. Because it just is. Like, it's not just the one that's coming to other places. It just is these days. It has, for a while now, eclipsed Halo, which is, I think, the thing that people think of for the legacy of it. But obviously, Halo has floundered as a IP since it left Bungie. In Forza Horizon, like, 3, 4, 5 have all been huge hits. They have been hugely successful. I think Forza Horizon 5... pushed a huge number of copies and also pushed a lot of Game Pass. Like, it just was like a massive hit of a game. So, like, this is their most successful game in this generation by a huge margin. And, like, if you're putting aside, like, that they bought Call of Duty and they own Minecraft, right?
You have to put aside that because that's a very recent development and doesn't really count yet.
Yeah, but in terms of Xbox Game Studios games, the ones developed by the Xbox Game Studios team, this is their most successful game this whole generation.
Yes, and I'm excited because I no longer have a modern Xbox, and if I did, it was the Series S, and I did play Horizon 5 on there, and that was fun, but it was graphically limited, and that's a beautiful game, and I'm really excited to play it on the PS5, where it's going to have all the bells and whistles, and I'm excited. I'm also Indiana Jones. I am champing at the bit for that. That game looks fucking great, and I'm really excited to play it, and it's all coming to PS5, so, like, my need to own an Xbox, the one thing we're waiting on is Halo the Master Chief Collection to go multi-platform, and when that does, that's it. That's the ballgame. Xbox is over as a console. Or as anything you need to own for exclusives. Like, that will be it. I still have an old Xbox One that my brother used to own under my TV. because it has Halo on it, and it has some backwards compatible games that I can't easily play anywhere else. But I don't need anything new with that. And now it's like this just tells us a lot that, because Xbox does have some good games. Forza Horizon 5 was high on my top 10 list the year that came out, as 3 was a couple years before that, like back in 2016. And yeah, the tactical retreat from exclusivity continues apace. This is a strategy. This is not a blip.
Oh no, yeah, and like if you've been following leakers, like Master Chief Collection is coming. They're presumably, as far as we can tell, they are working on whatever this Gears of War Legacy Collection, like of Gears of War 1, 2, 3, that has been rumored forever.
Oh, that'll be cool. I'm excited for that too.
Yeah, those have started up again, and that will certainly be multi-platform. And like the most recent wave of like insider leaks have all indicated things like the new Gears of War game is either going to be day and date or at some time later. Fable will be the same thing. Like Microsoft is just going full multi-platform at this point, which we more or less knew for over a year at this point. It's been a bit more than a year since they had that very weird scenario opened up last December of where the first wave of leaks came out about all this shit. All of those leaks, which have proven completely accurate at this point. And those leaks had included things like the Indiana Jones game eventually going to PS5 and all that kind of stuff, which all eventually did come to pass. And then, of course, they had that very weird scenario where Phil Spencer went on their like Xbox podcast and they had that whole like 30-minute conversation where he said like, oh, it's only these 4 games. And I'm not going to say what the games are. They're going to market them. And that was like grounded in Sea of Thieves and all of those. And it was that very carefully lawyer-like worded thing of them not directly saying that eventually everything is going to come, but also not denying that. And it just like was that thing where it was, I think, was very clear to anyone who's, you know, not drinking the Xbox Kool-Aid at that point that they had shifted a strategy to going multi-platform, and that it just is going to, it takes a quantity of time for that to happen. It's not like they can't just go immediately multi-platform the second they decide to do that. You have to make ports of these games. You know, so presumably Indiana Jones was just too far along in its development on Xbox to make a PS5 version day and date for when they wanted the game to come out, so it has a limited release. And we might get a couple more games. Again, maybe Fable will be like that. Maybe Gears of War will be like that. Like a couple of those games that are still currently in development, like State of Decay 3 or whatever, that's been in development for like 8 years or something at this point. Maybe some of those will have a slight delay to their releases on PlayStation. But I think you can expect every single Microsoft published video game, whether it is Xbox Game Studios, Activision, or on Bethesda/ZeniMax, that all of those are going to be multi-platform. They will all come to Xbox. They will obviously all come to PC. They will all come to PlayStation. And I think you can expect for at least a chunk of time, a lot of them to come to Switch 2 as well, is what a lot of the rumors indicate, because the Switch 2 should be able to play certainly any Xbox One capable game, but many, like, unless it's incredibly demanding, it shouldn't be that big of an issue for it to be able to port a PS5 or Xbox Series, certainly an Xbox Series S version of one of those games. Is already kind of ready-made to be able to adapt it for a Switch 2. And so I think Microsoft is just full in, they're doing multi-platform. This is like the biggest like official reveal of that is this Forza Horizon 5 one. But it just indicates all the things we've been hearing from behind the scenes insiders all just seems to be very accurate. And it makes me very curious what Xbox's pitch will be when they will have some kind of hardware. They will have some kind of handheld. They'll presumably have some kind of console-like device that is maybe more of a PC hybrid than consoles we understand now. But I think they are done playing the console game. I think they are done playing the, like, we're going to sell these things at a loss to get, like, a huge user base, and we're going to do all that. Like, I just think that that's not where the Xbox business is at anymore, and they are effectively becoming just a third-party publisher and the biggest third-party publisher in the market.
And I'm going to be honest, I like where we're heading in some ways. I don't like the sheer consolidation of the third-party market under Xbox. Y'all know that. But for the status quo as it is, I think Xbox transitioning into something else where Nintendo has its corner of the market and does something only Nintendo does, and Sony has its corner of the market and does the kind of classical console as we have understood it to be, and then maybe Xbox is doing what we all thought the Steam box was going to be 15 years ago. I think that is actually exciting. I think if you could honestly say to people, like, the Xbox does something visibly different than the PlayStation does something visibly different than Nintendo, exclusives other than really for Nintendo are not the main focus. The main focus differentiating these three things is kind of how and where you play. I think that's a more interesting, stable market than the weird tete-a-tete we've been in between Xbox and PlayStation the last 20 years, which hasn't really been a tete-a-tete. It's been a big kid punching a scrawny kid on the playground into the dust. And it's been increasingly just that scene from The Simpsons where you're going, stop, he's already dead. And I think, freeing some of those Xbox games is going to be very nice. And I also was talking to one of our listeners, Jamie, on Blue Sky, and he made a point that I followed on that I think is also important to realize here, which is that the other reason Xbox needs this is because for their console audience, they have trained Xbox players out of buying games because of Game Pass. And presuming that Game Pass either will not be a thing over on PlayStation or Switch, or it will be a very different kind of thing if those console manufacturers allow anything like it to be on their systems, which would be a big if. Then if you're a PlayStation gamer, you have not been trained out of buying games. If you're a Nintendo gamer, you definitely have not been trained out of buying games. There's no version of the subscription thing on Switch other than for old classic games, right? And so if you're one of them and Forza Horizon 5 comes out, you're not going to balk at paying $60 to buy Forza Horizon 5 because that's how games work on your system. But if you're selling Indiana Jones on Xbox and you spent $200 million making it or whatever, and people will only buy it through Game Pass, which gets you a nice chunk of fixed revenue but no actual growth to make up for increased spending in what you are making, then I think having other audiences you can open up to who have not yet been trained out of buying video games is a lifeline this company desperately needs.
Oh, absolutely. Because yes, Game Pass growth has been stalled for a long time. Like, they got a modest amount of growth by putting Call of Duty on there, but like the vast majority of revenue that they enjoyed from Call of Duty Black Ops 6 was selling copies of it on the PlayStation 5. It was not whatever, like 2% increased Game Pass subscribers or whatever, and we don't even have like particularly accurate or like precise data for that. We have like a little bit of data for the American market over the overall change in subscriber numbers or like subscriber percentage growth, which counts Nintendo Switch Online subscriptions, PSN subscriptions, and Game Pass subscriptions. We know that number was up a few percentages in the holiday season. That's it. So it's like, it's not, that did not.
And a couple of percentages does not replace the lost revenue from selling millions of $70 boxed units.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's just like their Game Pass thing is certainly not what they wanted it to be. We know from all the information that came out from the Activision trial of where they wanted some crazy 100 million subscribers by 2030 or something like that. They're just not there. Game Pass is not doing that. Game Pass, I don't think, will ever do that. I don't think there's anything you could do with Game Pass to do that. I just think it's not how people play games on a mass market scale. It just is not compatible. It's not, games are not movies or TV. You can't do the Netflix thing. And because the only thing they've been selling their consoles on for like 8 years or something is Game Pass, the Xbox Series console sales have absolutely fucking cratered. They have had, we now know in the US, which is the only market in which they are, even saying competitive is maybe being generous, but relatively competitive. They are dead in every other market around the world. The Xbox is a non-factor in Europe, even in Germany and UK, where traditionally they have done better, particularly in the UK. They're not doing good over there at all. And they have had the worst holiday sales this previous holiday season of Xbox hardware they have had more or less ever, outside of very key years like the first year of the original Xbox, which did worse because it was out for 2 months, yes. Or like the transition from the Xbox to the Xbox 360, where they cut the Xbox off, all of a sudden, basically, in order to transition to the 360 and kind of, take everybody by storm by putting out the console a year earlier than people would have expected. There are some of those like weird transition years that are a bit lower. But in terms of a regular sales year, this is sold worse than the Xbox One did, the Xbox 360 did, or the original Xbox did in holiday sales seasons. Like, it's fucking crazy. Like, they are just not selling Xbox Series. It is going to be sell substantially worse than the Xbox One did. It will sell more
Sean,
copies.
you'll remember, if you live in the U.S., the Black Friday sales on Xboxes this year were crazy. Like, they were selling those things. They were giving those things away, and they couldn't sell them. Like, that tells you a lot.
Yeah. And it's like, the Xbox Series consoles will outsell. I think they already have outsold the original Xboxes. They've already been on the market for longer than the original Xbox was. And so their current hardware strategy has completely failed and completely fallen apart. And I think you can just see that they are completely abandoning it. We get lots of reports of them just basically not sending Xboxes to European countries anymore, because, like, what's the point? They're not marketing it anymore. Their marketing strategy currently is telling everybody that every other device is also an Xbox, that every other device can play Xbox games. That's not a strategy you use unless you cannot sell your dedicated consoles. And so, them becoming a multi-platform publisher, I think, is a very smart choice. I'm like you. I like that they're doing that. I think that's a good thing. But it does mean they've got a very interesting challenge ahead of them in terms of what exactly do they pivot their market into. Like, do you allow Steam on some sort of, like, hybrid device? Because Steam is going to sell, all those copies are going to go to Steam if you put Steam on that thing. They're not going to buy your fucking Windows Game Store games. What happens to legacy titles like Xbox 360 and original Xbox games, which is the only thing I use my Series S for, is I've played Alan Wake, American's Nightmare, and I've been playing Ninja Gaiden Black 1. The original Xbox version.
That's the reason I have my Xbox out.
Yes.
You and I had the same thought, because we want to play Black 2, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's like, that's the only reason to have an Xbox Series console, is literally for backwards compatible 360 and OG Xbox games, which are not going to be on the PC. So I'm curious what happens with those. Like, because this is a clear point where that legacy backwards compatibility can break. There's just, like, it's a huge moment for Xbox in the coming, like, 3 years or so, whenever they're going to reveal what their next hardware strategy is. Man, they've got, like, a crazy set of problems ahead for themselves if they want to still stay in hardware and hold on to that in some capacity. So it's a weird time to be in video games.
It's weird. There's some exciting stuff. It also just underlines that in the sweep of history, man, it is a rough business selling consoles. There are 2 companies on Earth that have figured out how to make it work durably, and they are Nintendo and Sony, both Japanese. But, like, Sega, Atari, now Xbox have all come and gone, and I think it's interesting. I think it is fascinating that there's really only 2 that have kind of cracked the code long term.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.